Let's talk about the extraembryonic membranes. These are structures that are not actually part of the embryo or the fetus, but definitely contribute to the development of the embryo and fetus. And they are quite important. Without these, the embryo just wouldn't develop. So here's what we're talking about. We've got two pictures here. This, of course, is inside the uterus. Now, the membrane that surrounds everything is called the chorion. The chorion derives from the trophoblast, if you remember from my previous video. Part of the chorion develops into the placenta. The placenta is a hugely important organ. This is the site of exchange between the mother and the baby. So this is where nutrients are diffusing from the mother's circulatory system to the fetal circulatory system, and wastes are going in the opposite direction. And of course, connecting the baby to the placenta is the umbilical cord. Now, just inside the chorion, we have the amnion. The amnion is also known as the amniotic sac. It's a clear membrane filled with fluid. The purpose of the fluid is twofold. Number one, it contains water, which we know has a high heat capacity, and it's going to maintain a constant temperature, so that no matter what the mother's doing, that baby's always nice and cozy at 37 degrees. The other thing is that it acts as sort of a shock absorber. So if the mother's bouncing around and going for a jog, that baby has all that fluid to sort of keep it nicely cushioned. Now, one more extraembryonic membrane to talk about is the yolk sac. Now, the yolk sac is actually sort of housed outside of the chorion, and we can't see it in this diagram, but we can see it in this diagram. Now, in human beings, the yolk sac is really not important. It would be important if you were a chicken or a lizard or something like that. It's a source of nourishment for those developing vertebrates, but in a human being, it doesn't have that function. So let's go back to how all these structures form. So you should recognize this as a gastrula. This is when the embryo has formed 3 cell layers. We have the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Now, on top of the ectoderm, we have this small space that has developed. That is going to become the amnion. And below it, we have this space here, which will become the yolk sac, pardon me. So what happens is, again, this structure that's 3 cell layers is going to fold over on itself into the yolk sac. So let's take a look. Okay, so here's my 3 cell layers, and the space on top is the amnion, and the space below is the yolk sac. And we can see as this structure folds over on itself, the amnion is growing to surround the whole structure. And we also see that part of the yolk sac is going to be taken up. It's going to be fully enveloped and surrounded. That's going to become the intestines, the intestinal tract of the embryo. But it's not going to envelop all of the yolk sac. You're going to have this leftover region here, which will become the yolk sac in the embryo. So here's the placenta. Okay, if we look at the baby nice and snug in the uterus, here's the placenta. It's kind of a connection, I guess, between the mother and the fetal circulatory system. And what I want you to get from this diagram is that we see there are distinct blood vessels from the embryo side of the placenta and distinct blood vessels from the maternal side. What I really want you to understand is that there's no connection here. They do not touch. So all of the transfer of nutrients and wastes has to happen through diffusion. So nutrients, oxygen, stuff like that, are going to diffuse from the maternal blood vessels across this gap into the blood vessels connected to the umbilical cord. And wastes are going to do the opposite. They're going to diffuse from the umbilical cord blood vessels to the mother's blood vessels. Again, there's no direct connection, so there's no trading of blood between the mother and the embryo. Nutrients and wastes, yes, blood not. And so here's a little summary of what takes place in the placenta. So oxygen, nutrients, and some antibodies to help a newborn fight off infection are going to move from the mother's blood to the fetal blood by diffusion. Wastes like carbon dioxide and urea are going to move in the opposite direction from the fetal blood to the maternal blood, and the mother can then get rid of those wastes as she normally would her own wastes. But again, notice there is no connection, no mixing of fetal and maternal blood cells.